when I got the call to go to the White House, the reason they really recruited me was they saw the policy operation that we had built in Texas. It was, we want you to do in the West Wing what you built in Texas. Going on offense and protecting America and agriculture being national security, farm security is national security. The opportunity to honor and elevate our farmers in a way that they perhaps haven't seen in their lifetime. They see an administration that's fighting for them and a people that now I think are beginning to realize how important they are.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans? Welcome to this edition of Real Texans, talking to the men and women of the Lone Star State, doing great things to make the Lone Star State shine brighter. Not in my regular studio. Instead, I am in a very nice barn with our 33rd Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins. Brooke, this barn is unique in that now it's a very cute little gathering place. Where we're sitting was where your mom built this little enclosure for your horse in 1984.
Yes, this is all full circle, isn't it, for both you and for me? We have worked together a really, really long time.
Longer than this would want to admit in public.
Yes, have been partners for a long time. But yes, we are in Glen, Texas, where I grew up, where we actually raised our animals. And you're right, this is an old barn that my mom has since turned into a bed and breakfast. So it's now the breakfast barn. But this was actually the barn where I pretty much spent all of my childhood. And specifically, this stall is where my beloved Palomino horse, Brandy, ended up having a few more horses through the years through 4-H, but she was the one that was really my best friend. And this was her stall where we're now sitting. So it's very special.
So it's appropriate, and there's a lot of jokes can be made here about you go from mucking a stall to you're now in the city of muck of Washington D.C.
Right.
Similar
mucking
skill sets, maybe. Yeah.
I'm mucking the swamp now, right? Is it draining and mucking? No, there is no doubt about that. But we're making progress. We're making progress.
So we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to talk a little bit about your background. Right? We're in Glen, Texas, as you mentioned. You're a Glen girl. You and your sisters raised by a single mom here on a farm. Not exactly the stuff that that seems to scream out will be in the order of succession for the presidency should something horrible ever happen. A little abnormal background.
Yeah, it's but in a way it's almost so perfect, right? It's like, this moment in time and meeting this revolution that we're in America that we started in Texas, I think, all those years ago. But yeah, I in a way, people are very surprised to hear that, I didn't grow up in a fancy house in a big city and went to a fancy private school. I mean, we are really the stuff that the great American story and American dreams are made of. My mom, who's now a state representative from Glen and is standing right behind the camera right there,
yes.
tweaking and moving things as she always does to make the set perfect. And my beautiful sisters are here too. It kind of all came together. We could all come, but really full circle. But yeah, we were raised without a lot of material things, but my mom found this place for us to grow up on. She wanted us to understand the soil and hard work and building fences and baling hay and changing oil. And it was just the four of us. It was just us four girls on this 40 acres in this tiny town. She had a small business. She was a florist down on the town square. We all grew up kindergarten through 12th grade in the Glen schools and graduated with, I think, 30 people in my high school class. Went off to Texas A&M on an agriculture scholarship. But to your point, the idea that someday I would be serving in a cabinet for President Donald Trump in the position of defending farmers and ranchers and the rural way of life, it really is the stuff that dreams are made of. And God had his hand in all of it. watching my mom now fight for freedom in the Texas legislature. One of my sisters is one of the most amazing public school educators and administrators, I think, in the whole country. But right here in Glen Rose, leading the way. And my other sister is a leader in the energy field. She runs the Ham Institute in Oklahoma, and she's a superstar. But this is who we are. It's not, fancy titles and lots of, fancy things along the way. We are of this part of America, and we are Texans to our core. And this is what made us, is not just growing up with a single mom and learning hard work, but also being from and of rural America and rural Texas.
You're, for as long as I've known you,
which is
for a while. Let's say it's been a while.
25 years, yes.
You have always been defined as being from Glen Rose.
It's
despite,
true.
When you and I first met, you were living in Fort Worth,
yes.
right? I mean, so it's, most of your life has been outside of Glen Rose.
Yeah.
But Glen Rose kind of defines you in a lot of ways, doesn't it?
It really did and continues to do so. And you're right. I mean, it was never intentional, but I went to College Station and then to Austin. There's some law school in Austin I went to that I can't remember the name. And then Washington, D.C., and then to Dallas to a big law firm, and then back to Washington, D.C., and then working in Austin, and now Fort Worth, and now back to Washington, D.C. But through all of it, when people ask where I'm from, I have always answered Glen Rose. And again, none of that was ever a ploy or anything. It just always was who I was and am. And even now, I mean, it's after we finish here, we're going to go up to the high school and meet the ag teachers and talk to some of the ag kids and go by my sister's school where she's principal. And we're going to go to lunch here in Glen Rose, and we spend all of our holidays here. Of course, our family still has this incredible property with animals. You can see our donkey, Bradley, right out the door. And there's one of our horses my girls grew up on. So yeah, it is who we are. And it's a certain grounding. And it's funny, in Washington, I have a lot of people say all the time, how are you so optimistic all the time? And how are you so happy? And for me, I think about it, it's very natural, but I do think this grounding in knowing who we are, knowing how we grew up, knowing what has made America so great. And it is the people of places like Glen Rose and the smaller towns in America and the farmers and the ranchers. That is the fabric of our country. And that's why. And of course, Jesus, being on the journey all the way has just been such a game changer for me too. So, yeah.
All right. So, we'll stick with this for one second because, like I said, you've in some ways been defined as, the girl from Glen Rose,
Mm-hmm.
but wrapped up in that is you're a Secretary of Agriculture. And I was kind of looking through your predecessors. You're also kind of unique in that you have an actual ag degree from an actual ag-affiliated university.
Mm-hmm.
And you also grew up in FFA.
Yeah.
Talk about kind of the why FFA was important and how that's helped shape your approach to ag.
Yeah, thank you for that. Isn't it fascinating that I'm the first ag secretary from Texas?
Yes.
And the first ag secretary from FFA.
Right.
I mean, I'm sort of stunned by that. The Future Farmers of America is one of the greatest and really defining for me leadership, teamwork, just everything that FFA is about, the future farmers, the agriculture piece. But Texas is such a driver in the country in terms of industry and agriculture, and to have never had a Secretary of Ag. And to your point at the very beginning, I am in the succession to the presidency because the Department of Agriculture wasn't one of the first founding 4 departments, but it was the second one after Interior that Abraham Lincoln founded in the 1860s. So it's not that this is a newer department like Homeland Security or some of the other ones, but it's fascinating that Texas, certainly not Texas A&M and not FFA, has ever had a Secretary of Ag. So to be able to pull all of those forces together and make them a big part of the puzzle in terms of the battle for America and what we're doing up in Washington, with that background, People said it was unconventional when the president called me for the job, but in a way, it's almost the most conventional, just has not been deployed. And I will say, and the great vision of Donald Trump, who often knows better or more than most of us do about the right people at the right time in the right place. This was his idea to put me in this spot. It was not anything I necessarily asked for. It wasn't something I had been lobbying for, certainly, but that was his vision. And there are others in the cabinet, too, that unexpectedly got a call for their particular role. And now we all laugh about how God had a plan and Donald Trump is executing it.
So you graduate from Glen Rose High School.
Mm-hmm.
You went to A&M with a scholarship.
Yeah.
You went to law school. You did a little bit of law stuff for a little while, working for a federal judge and those kind of fun, exciting things. At what point did you decide, being a lawyer isn't really what billing hours and suing people isn't really what when did that hit you?
Well, no offense to all of my friends who practice law and who do such important things for the country. I remember in law school, had my agriculture degree, but I actually really enjoyed the academic side of the law. And I think it's because I was always so drawn to policy, but to execute policy, either you're stopping the bad laws or you're doing the good stuff, which there's not many good laws, right? We really want to get government out of the way. But again, another podcast for another time. But law school I really enjoyed, but the practice of law to me, and I've worked at one of the best law firms. I still keep in touch with a lot of those attorneys. But I remember for the couple of years that I did that, sitting in my office and just thinking, what am I doing to help people here? I'm billing hours. I'm making a really good salary. My husband, Mark, was very happy to be starting to pay down some big student loans from law school. But I just would walk in that office with a billable hour pad every 6 minutes to bill to some client. I was right out of law school. I didn't really know what I was doing, making this big salary and thinking, what is the purpose here? I don't understand what the calling is. I'm not really helping anybody here. And so, I had, of course, gotten to know Rick Perry very well through FFA first when he was ag commissioner and I was state FFA officer. And then he became, of course, lieutenant governor. And then when George Bush went to the presidency because of the hanging chads, after the hanging chad issue in Florida, Rick Perry moved to governor. And that's how I ended up pivoting out of law and into policy, but very gladly and happily to do so.
So a big chunk of your career has been spent focused on state policy. You and I met because you were in Rick Perry's office.
Yeah.
You took over leading Texas Public Policy Foundation while I was there. So state policy is what when folks met Brooke Rollins, it was because Brooke Rollins was focused on fixing state policy.
That's right.
Looking at state policy.
Yeah.
You then shifted with, the president asked you to go in the Office of American Innovation. How has that shifted? How has it affected your mindset looking at federal policy, having spent, almost 20 years focused on state policy?
Well, and it's funny, I never planned to do anything but state policy. I mean, and I know
you and I laughed about how stupid it was to work on federal policy.
And why would anyone ever go to the Washington, and why would anyone ever want to be a congressman or a senator? Like, it's just all so broken in Washington. And if we were really going to save the American dream, the states had to lead the way. And if there was any state that was going to do it, it was going to be Texas. You and I talked about that 25 years ago. Where we are today versus then is sort of a miracle. I mean, there's still so much to do, and you've been such a warrior, but to see Texas continue to lead the way and just seeing states like Florida and others come alongside, I believe Texas saved the country. And interestingly, when I got the call to go to the White House, and I said no, and then they called again, and I said no, and then they called again, and obviously eventually said yes after a lot of prayer and discussion with my family. But the reason they really recruited me was they saw the policy operation that we had built in Texas and how over the course of, that's the good news about you and I being now on the other side of the age spectrum. When we started, we were so young, but we fought for more than a decade together. And in that decade, you actually saw real policy implementation, execution, and the real effect on people's lives. In that time, Michael, you remember Texas created more jobs than every other state combined.
Right.
Florida was not on the ascension yet. It was really just Texas focused on cutting taxes, cutting regulation, fixing our civil justice, our court system, focusing on education. Although we finally got a real breakthrough recently, but focusing on real education. And most other states weren't doing that. Do you remember when we said no to federal dollars?
Right.
And everyone was stunned. It was like, well, wait a minute.
Horrified.
No one says no to money, free money coming from Washington. And God bless Rick Perry. I mean, we're the ones that suggested that to him, but he's the one that said, no, I don't want your extra money. I don't want to tie my state down. And I almost see that as such a huge turning point. This was way before Donald Trump came along and came down the escalator and said, I'm returning power to the people. It's too much money. Back then, every Democrat, obviously, but also every Republican said, free money, we need the money, we need the money. And we said no and wrote about it and suggested it and cajoled and got a little aggressive sometimes. But ultimately, the idea that all of those decisions led to lower poverty rates in our state versus California, which had the idea of more taxes to help the poor. What happened is it drove more people into poverty in California, whereas in Texas, we lifted people out of poverty by cutting taxes and less regulation and focusing on policy. So when the White House called, it was, we want you to do in the West Wing what you built in Texas. We want a Texas Public Policy Foundation or some aggressive, relentless policy machine that is on offense all the time. And, the magic of Donald Trump is in that first White House. I mean, he'd never even spent the night in Washington before he came and was sworn in. His first night he'd ever spent in Washington, D.C. was in the White House. That is remarkable. He'd only been to Washington 5 times before he was elected president, ever. Never run for any office, all of the above. So when they all came in, Jared Kushner, Ivanka, all of them, almost none of them had been of Washington, D.C., which was the founder's vision, that you show up, that you take with you your business, perspective, that you serve the people, that you protect liberty, and then you go home. And as you know, as well as anyone, over the course of 150, 200 years, we'd gotten so far away from that. And so, but what they realized about 6 months in is, okay, we probably need a team that knows how to get policy done. And when you're given such a short period of time, 4 years is such a short period of time, especially if you're not of that world. So that was the recruitment process that the team went through, and calling me and asking TPPF to help, and then realizing what we had accomplished in Texas, and then building something similar in the White House. So that's really how it got there. And to answer your question, the long way of saying that is that the states were, under the founder's vision, the real guardians of freedom and democracy and liberty. Today, that's an even more important role. And so every day in the first Trump White House, and I was in the West Wing then, I was like, where are the states on this? We need the states. What are the states doing? The states are the laboratories of democracy. And in Washington, that is not a normal way to think. But towards the end of first term, I think if you go back and look, you'll see a real pivot toward relying on the states, partnering with the states. And now, Michael Sullivan, it's everything we do. Let's block grant everything to the states. It's not just in education. It's in everything, whether it's FEMA, in ag. I mean, everything we're doing is how we get power out of Washington and how we empower the states to do more. And that's the 10th Amendment. The government that's closest to the people is the one that will serve the people the best. And that's what we're implementing.
So I want to shift quickly to what you do every day, all right, or at least relate to it every day. A generation, maybe 2 generations, we have seen the decline of the family farm. Mm-hmm. We've seen it's harder and harder for folks who, once that was their family livelihood, their business. Now, for many families, they have to have 1 or 2 or 3 other gigs to support their family farm.
Right.
Is it important to reclaim that? Is it important to bring that back?
Yeah, it is.
And is it your job to bring it back? Is it Congress? Is it the state legislature? How do we reclaim that sense of a family farm, a family business?
We have to. I just feel so strongly, not just for farmers and ranchers, but also just for the fabric of America. And, any country in the beginning, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they're all farmers. Almost 95%, I think, of America 250 years ago were actual farmers. And you see, the great innovation, technology, the markets kind of becoming more efficient, the free enterprise system. You've seen a consolidation where now only 2% of our country are farmers. You compare that to in India, where 70, 80% are still farming. The more third world countries with extreme poverty, you still see people trying to support their family on a couple acres.
Subsistence farming.
Yeah, exactly. But in America, that's not the case. However, with the resurgence and the focus of this president on taking the American dream to every corner of America, with the trend now of more Americans wanting to live in smaller communities. For decades, the trend was to move into urban areas and to move away from that sort of a life. But now it is trended back. And so the opportunity to open the aperture for more younger Americans to get into moving to rural America, making a living in agriculture, we're beginning to see that trend up. So at USDA, and it's not just farming, it's better housing in rural America, better healthcare in rural America, in a lot of places, better education in rural America. There's so much we can do. You see the Elon Musks and the real innovators out there who are building these, incredible enterprises. They're choosing rural America to put their companies now. And they believe there's a better quality of life, more hardworking people in these parts of the country. And so we're sort of in a very interesting, I call it a revolution, the big revolution similar to 1776 and 1862 with the Civil War. And I think today is the battle for the soul of the country. But just right underneath that is a revolution in terms of pushing back on this idea that, the government knows best and that, and I know we've been talking about this in Texas for a long time, but when you saw President Trump win an unprecedented election in November, where we felt fairly confident he'd win the swing states. We had really good work on that, and I worked on that obviously in the interim between the two, Trump 1, Trump 2. But what we didn't know would ever happen again was the win of the popular vote. That's because of the extreme cheating, honestly, that happens, especially in the blue states, the 12 to 15 million illegal aliens that had crossed. And in the 8 swing states, we had locked down the registration of those voters pretty much. But in the blue states, we didn't have the resources to focus on that. So we didn't know how many were getting registered to vote. We didn't know that our side would ever win the popular vote again. The fact that he did against all odds tells you that revolution has woken people up. And so to the extent of what we're talking about in terms of returning to those, the root of the American greatness of hard work and discipline and living on the land and providing for your family, I think we're pivoting back to that now. And listen, the current structure doesn't support that in America. The current structure in agriculture supports the consolidation, supports the purchase of farmland and some of our producers to be owned by foreign entities, including foreign adversaries. That's now becomes a big part of my priority list, working amongst the incredible cabinet the president's put together with the president, President Trump, to begin to claw that back and to build an infrastructure so that when we walk out of there in 3.5 years, it doesn't whiplash back to something else, that we can continue that trajectory. And if we can't, then when America celebrates 500, another 250 years, I don't know what that will look like anymore. I don't know that the dream will still be there.
The Department of the Interior is jokingly called the Department of Everything Else.
I feel like that's USDA.
Maybe USDA too. But for many years, the USDA was referred to as the invisible agency, the invisible department, the invisible secretary. And it kind of demonstrates the kind of where folks were viewing ag maybe for a lot of time. So it's been very interesting to see the way the president and you and the cabinet have treated agriculture, where this summer you did a press conference standing alongside the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security, the president talking about agriculture as a national security issue. This is a real shift in understanding
It
of the
is.
role of ag, isn't it?
It is. And it's, I think, again, it goes to President Trump's mind and how he works in putting me in this spot. Normally on both sides, the Secretary of Ag is an older sort of, this is a capstone in their career. They've been a governor or a senator or something else. And I don't want to say
Very low expectations.
Yeah, more of a caretaker, maybe. More on defense. That's the best way to say it, because I adore as former Secretary Sonny Perdue and think he did a good job. The Biden USDA was a disaster. I mean, they went so woke and put so much. I know. So that's a whole other podcast too. So pulling that back, but what I will say is the president asking me to do this job, and you know this very well, going on offense and protecting America and agriculture being national security, farm security is national security, and people understanding that and waking up. I mean, we couldn't have scripted this any better.
Exactly.
Those are actually farm animals, everybody. That is not a sound, that is not a little sound system Michael put up out there. They agree with everything we say. But that farm security is national security, elevating the role and the importance of the American farmer, understanding that as the president is completely realigning the world economy with his tariff renegotiations, the industry that helps the most, arguably, is agriculture. And our farmers have been suffering now for years. High interest rates, inflation, cost of fertilizer. Under Biden, there was not one new trade deal. Think about this. Not one new trade deal struck in 4 years under Joe Biden. What in the world were they doing over there? Why weren't they fighting for our industries, not just ag, but auto and everything else? It's insane. When we left Trump won, there was a trade surplus with our ag commodities and our ag products. We were selling more. Now there's a $50 billion trade deficit that Joe Biden left us with. It's no wonder that our ag producers are going bankrupt, and they're shutting things down, and they're selling to China and to Brazil and to places that are not our friends. And so it really is existential. We talk a lot about, and I believe it with everything I am, that the values and the foundation of hard work in rural America are built on the backs of our farmers and ranchers. But it is much bigger than that. It is national security and the importance of that. And then the third thing, and the third reason, is that President Trump loves farmers. I have seen it firsthand and this is very interesting, right? He's the guy in the very expensive suit living in the gold-plated penthouse, the billionaire from New York City who I'm not sure has ever walked a row of corn or been in a cattle lot, but what he would say is that those are his people, and he's right. He's right, and he knows it and he feels it, and that's his love is really deep for this industry and these people.
Year 2016, I was in New York City for a meeting with President.
Yes.
Not yet President Trump, Republican nominee Trump.
I remember this.
Visit with Eric Trump for a little
Yes.
while, kind of downstairs, a little cafeteria. And I said, what's something people don't know about your dad? And Eric Trump's response is, well, people probably don't know that he made all of us work job sites in
Yes.
suburbs. And he, and he kind of laughed about it, and he made kind of a joke about Dad never did it, he made us do it, kind of thing. And to me, it was very telling in terms of a fellow who did kind of grew up in a very nice home, very nice, background, all that kind of stuff. No shame in that.
Yeah.
But yet he understood the need of his kids to be a little more grounded, a little better, and it feels like there's a real sense of that among the kind of the entire administration, because you're you're a unique snowflake like everyone else, right? But you've got Scott Turner, again, and the guy who's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. To begin, kind of a not exactly the first one. So you have an administration that seems focused on people who are willing to do things and celebrate the doing of things.
No, it's true, and it's the kids, Don Jr. and Eric and Ivanka, are now really great friends. And I've gotten to know them. Didn't know them in 16 when you went to meet with them, but since then, very close. But they are all the most hardworking, best, most down-to-earth, kindest people I've been around. And that doesn't just happen. It's funny. I remember before I met Donald Trump, and you read all the things, and, and certainly he has not led a perfect, life, and none of us have. But you meet those kids and you realize that something went very right. And that doesn't just happen. That the parenting and the model that he set, and no, they tell the stories at 10 years old on the weekends, all their friends were getting on jets and flying to Paris, and they were going to job sites and working right alongside the landscape crew. And they would start with the landscape crew, all three of them, not just the boys, but Ivanka too. They would start with the landscape crew and they'd plant and weed eat and do all the things. And then they would move up to like the construction crew. And then they'd all be in there, learning how to build buildings. And then they would move up to the secretary job. And then they'd move up. He had them working every weekend, every day after school, I think from the time they were 10 years old. And you can see it now. And it's also true of President Trump. The real loyalty, there's been a lot written about how horrible he is to people that work for him. And you've certainly seen a lot of Trump one that have turned against him. Some of his former cabinet members, some of his former chiefs of staff. But what the story that's not told is those are all people that he fired because he didn't believe they were doing the job that the American taxpayer and voter elected him to do. And he has zero patience for any kind of incompetence or anything he sees that isn't correctly done. And but the flip side of that is for those that he does believe are highly competent and have the hustle and the discipline and the mind to really fight for the American people and get things done, he gives us basically the keys to the kingdom. And I think that's the cabinet you see now. That is a group of people that have been called to meet this moment, that are part of this revolution in American history, that will die for our country. And this is our opportunity to serve in a way that perhaps we'll never have again in America. And it's real, and you can see it and feel it.
When we leave here, when we finish up here in a few minutes, you are going to be heading over, as you mentioned, to Glen Rose, to the Glen Rose High School.
To my high school.
FA kids. Maybe pay some old library dues or something when you're there. But what advice do you give to kids that age who are maybe in FFA or what kind of advice do you give those kids about? For a long time, it was get off the family farm, get out of the industry. There's no hope. Yeah. What do you say to them to encourage them to stick with it?
Yeah, I was in Mississippi yesterday meeting with farmers and ranchers there. Farm economy is very tenuous right now, so trying to build out different opportunities to create this prosperity that they have long deserved and just haven't been able to get to for reasons outside of their own making. But as hard as things are right now, and as dire, especially with our row crops, corn, wheat, soybean, cotton, as dire as it is today, there is a sense of optimism that they would say and have told me they haven't had in a really long time. And I think that sense of optimism comes from a lot of things. You mentioning that agriculture is now mentioned multiples of times by multiples of cabinet members, including the president and the vice president, no matter where we are, that the opportunity to honor and elevate our farmers in a way that they perhaps haven't seen in their lifetime. They see an administration that's fighting for them and a people that now I think are beginning to realize how important they are. But then I want to also marry that to Bobby Kennedy and his fight to make America healthy again. He has unexpectedly become one of my best friends. And
wouldn't have guessed that a year ago.
I know, right? I wouldn't have even a year ago. I think actually exactly a year ago is when he endorsed President Trump.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it was 2 days ago. And I remember sitting in my office thinking, well, this is a little strange and this is going to be interesting to see where this goes. He is one of the kindest, smartest, best, most devoted person I've ever met in my life. And his devotion to fighting this chronic obesity, chronic disease, when 3 out of 4 of our young Americans aged 18 to 22 can't pass the military readiness test. Talk about national security. The rates of diabetes it is astounding. And so Bobby's effort to make America healthy again has again opened up this whole narrative and discussion about where does the best, most healthy food come from. It doesn't come from a package in the store, right? It doesn't come from, no offense to my friends in fast food, because listen, I love a good McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, as does Donald Trump. But that's not how we're going to solve this problem. And this problem is so severe that it isn't just on the front end with the obesity and national security, it's on the back end with our healthcare costs. That it has also opened up people's eyes to, I want more and better food for my family. And where can I get that? Well, that's from farmers markets and locally produced foods, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot we're going to be able to do together. But I think that sense of optimism from our farmers comes from the idea that America is finally realizing that the food that they're eating and buying every day may not be what's best for their family, and doing a little bit of research and figuring out where that is. And that goes straight to our local farmers. So there's a lot more coming on this. So stay tuned, but I'm really excited about it.
Madam Secretary, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. And thanks for joining this edition of Real Texans.